Picture this, September 1957. A quiet hospital room in Darmstadt, West Germany. A frail old man lies in a bed. He goes by the name Bruno Albrecht. Neighbors call him unremarkable, kind even, a traveling salesman. But as death inches closer, the mask cracks. He calls for a priest, leans in, and whispers his real name. Fritz Katzmann, the man who personally signed off on the murder of 434,329 human beings. The man who, in his own leather-bound report, declared an entire region of Europe free of Jews, and wrote it with pride. He had been living freely for 12 years. While Holocaust survivors were still waking up screaming, while orphaned children were still searching for their parents' names on lists that never answered back. This man was knocking on doors, selling goods. He died in that bed, uncharged, unprosecuted, untouched. And here is the detail that makes it worse. His own wife and 5 children never heard from him again after the war. He didn't just abandon 434,000 victims, he abandoned his own family too. This is the story of how a coal miner's son from a small German town became one of the most prolific mass murderers in history, and then vanished like smoke. Welcome to World War II Time Tales, where we dig up the stories mainstream history buries. If you are new here, subscribe right now and ring that bell. We upload the history they didn't teach you in school, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Let's go back to where this nightmare began. Before the bombs fell and the blood soaked into the cobblestones, Lviv was one of the most remarkable cities in Eastern Europe. In the 1931 census recorded 312,000 residents, ethnic Poles at roughly 50%, Jews at 32%, Ukrainians at about 16%. It had opera houses, universities, and coffee shops where writers argued past midnight. Jewish families had lived there for centuries. They were doctors, lawyers, tailors, and teachers. They had names, addresses, and Sunday routines. But beneath the cultural richness, ethnic tensions were cracking. Ukrainian nationalists wanted independence. Polish nationalists wanted dominance. And the Jewish community, as they had been across Europe for centuries, found themselves squeezed between forces that neither fully accepted them. Then August 1939 arrived, and a secret deal written in Berlin and Moscow shattered everything. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact secretly divided Eastern Europe between 2 dictators, where Eastern Poland, including Lviv, was gifted to Stalin. On September 17, 1939, Soviet tanks rolled in from the east. Poland, already being consumed from the west by Germany, never stood a chance. Within weeks, the country was erased from the map. Lviv became Soviet territory, and life as its people knew it ended overnight. Soviet rule from 1939 to 1941 was methodical and deeply personal in its cruelty. Private businesses were nationalized. Churches were shuttered. The Polish intelligentsia, professors, judges, officers, were specifically hunted. The NKVD, Stalin's secret police, arrested tens of thousands. Many were shipped to Siberian labor camps in cattle cars. Others were simply shot in basement execution rooms at 3 major Lviv prisons, Brigidki, Lonsky, and Zamarstyniev. Onyu, a female prisoner, later recalled walking past bodies with missing ears, eyes, and noses when German forces freed her. Bohdan Kazanevsky, a Brigidki survivor, described hearing deafening screams rising from the basement floors as prisoners were tortured before execution. When it became clear in late June 1941 that the Germans were unstoppable, the NKVD made their final monstrous decision: murder every political prisoner before retreating. Soviet records acknowledge nearly 9,000 killed across Ukraine. Historians estimate the true figure in western Ukraine alone reached between 10,000 and 40,000. In the prisons of Lviv, the bodies were left rotting in the summer heat. They were decomposing before anyone found them. On June 22, 1941, a Sunday, Operation Barbarossa launched across the Eastern Front. In over 3 million German and Axis troops tore into Soviet territory along a 2,000-mile front. Lviv fell to Nazi forces in the early hours of June 30, 1941. They did not come alone. Embedded with the German advance was the OUNB, the radical wing of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. led locally in Lviv by Yaroslav Stetsko. In 1939, Stetsko had published an article calling Jews nomads and parasites, a nation of swindlers and egotists bent on corrupting warrior culture. He was not fringe. He was the man in charge on the ground. Within hours of the Soviets fleeing, posters went up across the city. Ukraine for Ukrainians. Then another. People, know this. Moscow, Poland, the Hungarians. The Jews are your enemies. Destroy them. The Nazis then seized on the discovery of the NKVD prison corpses as a propaganda weapon. They blamed the Jews for the massacres. It was a fabricated lie. But in an occupied city with weapons in the hands of nationalists, a lie only needs to be loud enough and long enough to be deadly. The first pogrom erupted on July 1st, 1941. What followed was not chaos. It was organized humiliation. Systematic savagery designed to break human beings before killing them. Jewish men, women, and children were dragged from apartments by Ukrainian militiamen and local civilians. Some were forced to crawl on their hands and knees scrubbing streets while crowds laughed. Jewish women were stripped and chased through public streets, beaten with wooden clubs, not only by men, but by teenage boys. People were attacked with axes, knives, and stones. The Germans then assigned Jews the most grotesque task imaginable, exhuming the NKVD corpses from the prison yards. But before reaching the bodies, Jews were driven through human gauntlets. Two lines of people armed with sticks and rocks, forced to run through a tunnel of blows. Then came the most calculated act of dehumanization. Two Jewish men were forced to hold a decomposing, bloated corpse, rotting in summer heat, by the head and legs. A Jewish woman was then made to symbolically wash the body in midair and press her lips to its dead hand. Dr. Isidor Eliashlan, a Lviv lawyer dragged into Brigidki prison, later testified under oath. The prison walls surrounding the yard were smeared with blood up to the first floor, with fragments of brain tissue from tortured victims pressed into the stone. On July 2nd, 1941, the Einsatzgruppe C, Nazi mobile killing squads, entered Lviv and immediately professionalized the slaughter. These were not combat soldiers. These were units designed to murder civilians at scale. With Ukrainian militia assistance, Jews were rounded up and forced into a stadium. They were beaten with thick clubs, forced to sprint around the track until they collapsed, thrown to the ground and ordered back up, over and over, under a rain of blows. Most were then loaded onto trucks and driven to forests outside the city, where they were shot into mass graves. At least 2,000 Jews were executed in this single operation. Killer Felix Landau kept a personal diary, a document that would later become courtroom evidence. He described Jews staggering through Lviv's streets with their faces caved in, hands shattered, and, in his own words, eyes hanging out of their sockets. He described the Citadel execution site. There were rows of Jews lying one on top of the other like pigs, whimpering horribly. The Jews kept streaming out of the Citadel, completely covered in blood. He wrote it like a man describing the weather. In late July 1941, the Nazis staged a second pogrom, cynically named Petliura Days, after a Ukrainian nationalist leader assassinated in 1926. The goal was to dress organized murder as spontaneous ethnic grievance. German officers plied Ukrainian peasants with vodka before sending them into Jewish homes carrying farm tools. In the early morning of July 25th, mobs kicked in doors, beat men and women in the streets, looted everything they could carry, and dragged survivors to Wonky Street prison. Jan Badian, one of the Jews imprisoned there, gave testimony that still haunts historians. Groups of people were constantly moving. Behind them ran Germans and Ukrainians with sticks, beating them. In the middle of the yard stood a strange group, their faces bruised, clothes torn and bloodstained, chanting in unison, "We, the Jews, are guilty of the war." They had been beaten into reciting that confession. On July 26th, a selection was made. A handful of doctors were released. Everyone else was loaded onto trucks and driven outside the city. They never came back. At least 4,000 Jews were massacred in early July. More than 2,000 additional victims were murdered during Petliura Days. Now we arrive at the man himself. Fritz Katzmann was born on May 6, 1906, in Langendreer, a small coal mining town in western Germany. His father worked the mines. Fritz trained as a carpenter. When the economy collapsed in the late 1920s, he lost his job, and in December 1927, he joined the Nazi SA paramilitary. One detail tells you everything. He was once arrested for drunken assault. His SS standing was unaffected. He married. He had 5 children. He received the Golden Party badge for being an early Nazi Party member. In 1934, he participated in the Night of the Long Knives, the mass murder of political rivals inside the Nazi Party itself. This was not a fanatic who appeared from nowhere. This was a man who climbed the SS ladder promotion by promotion, atrocity by atrocity. In November 1941, Katzman established the Lviv ghetto. At its peak, it imprisoned approximately 120,000 Jews in conditions engineered to break people before killing them. Overcrowding, starvation, disease, and why random shootings. Katzman personally directed the murder of between 55,000 and 65,000 Jews in Lviv between 1941 and 1942 alone. His Jew hunts across the wider Galicia district killed an additional 143,000 people. Deportations to Belzec extermination camp and Janovska concentration camp consumed what remained. On June 30, 1943, Katzman sat down and wrote what would become one of the most damning documents in the entire history of the Holocaust. The Katzman Report, leather-bound, stamped Reich secret document, was a status update on what he called the solution of the Jewish question in the district of Galicia. Inside, he itemized everything. Jews murdered and deported, 434,329 confiscated property, gold teeth, jewelry, fur coats, in foreign currency, including over 261,000 US dollars complaints that Jews were hiding in sewers and chimneys to escape his raids. Complaints that diseases in the ghetto were endangering his own men, not concern for victims, just operational inconvenience. His closing line, written without hesitation, Galicia is judenfrei. Galicia is free of Jews, submitted as a job well done. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Fritz Katzmann did not stand trial. He did not report to Allied forces. He vanished. He resurfaced in Darmstadt, West Germany, under the fake name Bruno Albrecht, a traveling salesman. Quiet, unremarkable. His neighbors never suspected a thing. And here is the detail that should make your blood freeze. His own wife and 5 children never heard from him again. He cut off his entire family to disappear completely. While survivors searched for names on lists that never answered, Katzman was knocking on doors in West Germany, sleeping in a warm bed, watching the post-war world rebuild around him. For 12 years, he lived free. Then in that hospital room in 1957, death finally came, and he whispered the truth to a priest. Fritz Katzmann died on September 19, 1957, uncharged, unprosecuted, in a bed, in a city that did not know his name. When Soviet forces liberated Lviv on July 27, 1944, they found a ghost city, out of a Jewish population that had once exceeded 200,000 people. Less than 1% had survived. History does not always end with justice. Sometimes it ends with a war criminal dying quietly in a hospital bed while the world moves on. But here at WWII Time Tales, we refuse to let it move on without record. The victims of Lviv, 200,000 men, women, and children who built real lives in that city, deserve more than a footnote. They deserve to be named. They deserve to be remembered. And the men who murdered them deserve to be exposed, even decades later. That is exactly why this channel exists. If this video hits you, like it, share it, and subscribe to WWII Time Tales. Every single view is a refusal to forget. Ring that bell. We will see you on the next one.